Hello and welcome to everyone for another episode of Cloud Fridays. For those of you who are in this episode, welcome to the live recording of Cloud Fridays. By being here, you have consented to the use of your image and your name, and well, those of you presenting, you should be here anyway. Just to recap on what Cloud Fridays actually is. Cloud Fridays started to be about Fridays and doing things that we normally do at night, like user groups on a Friday. But the emphasis for Cloud Friday is to have more of an educational spin of the things that you can do in Azure and with Azure. So we're trying to get away from the normal user group thing, which is actually not much of a user group these days, because we don't share experiences with each other. We tend to have a person that does a technology demo, and then we call that a user group because we look at it and then we don't talk to each other. So Cloud Fridays is wanting to be different, where we empower the community with the knowledge that we share for the sake of teaching and empowering around Azure. Today, we're going to have two fantastic sessions, and actually I'm going to hand over to my esteemed friend, George the Matt, to go and actually the George Clooney who will be Matt, or Matt who will be George Clooney, and introduce our speakers.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for that awesome kickoff. Yes, as you said, some awesome sessions today. So first of all, we got Carike and Warren giving us a demonstration on how you can provision resources in Azure using Power Apps, if I understand correctly, in Teams nogal. So
Yes.
Yeah, that sounds like fun. And then later on, we've got the Belgians joining us, and they'll be showing us some of the Bastion goodness, which I think ties in nicely with provisioning resources in Azure through Power Apps, because once you've provisioned them, you need to be able to connect to them somehow. And Azure Bastion is the secure way of connecting to those virtual machines once you've got them up there. So yeah, looking forward to those presentations and demos. And we also just, we encourage you to come off mute, ask questions in the chat, and let's have a conversation around what you're doing with Azure and Bastion and how you're securing your resources. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Carike and Warren.
Cool. Awesome. Warren, you want to go?
Oh, you want me to do the introduction? Okay.
No, if you want to. Completely up to you.
Ladies first. Come on.
No problem. Cool. So thanks, Matt. Thanks for that intro. I'm very excited to be talking about this, and I'm even more excited because at this moment they have some partner sessions that's happening at Microsoft, which is really cool. And one of the drives, or let me say solution plays, was that we need to integrate more low-code, no-code solutions into Azure as well. So I was super psyched that Warren and I actually, thanks for the suggestion, Warren, to do some Power Apps with Azure. That was really rad. I've been playing around with that a little bit, and it's been really cool to see what the possibilities are, realizing that even though I'm not as skilled in Azure, so if someone that's beginning in Azure, you can actually take the skills you already have and build onto that. So that's pretty cool. I don't know if we should do any formal introductions, or can I just start sharing my screen?
Just go ahead. I think. Nick, you want to say something?
Well, why don't you introduce yourself? And
okay.
Tell us what you do and why do you care about this topic? Because remember that this is going to be recorded, and that these sessions tend to have a long tail in terms of people watching the recordings, and it'd be good for them to know who you are, what you do, and why do you care about this topic.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'm Carike Buerta. I work for iSolve Business Solutions, and we're also a partner of IQ Business, most recently partnered with them. So I'm passionate about the Power Platform in general, actually, specializing mostly in Power Apps, Power Automate, Power Virtual Agents, all of those things. So yes, it's all about power. No, I'm kidding. So the reason that I actually enjoy this so much is because it really enables everyone to be able to develop apps for themselves, you know, because I know when Power Apps just got introduced, a lot of like proper devies were super upset because they were like, what's going to happen to their jobs and all of those things. It isn't threatened at all. I can tell people that. Power Platform has a nice integration with Visual Studio where you can go like pro dev with Power Apps. I just haven't had any case studies for that, but I'm sure they are there. We just have to look out for them. But what I really, really enjoy about Power Apps or the Power Platform is what I've experienced in my own company is we constantly, as a consulting company, developing awesome solutions for our clients, but we neglect our own people in our own company. And Power Platform really enables the business users of your own company to develop apps without having to wait for IT to come and help them or assist them. Because, I mean, as an IT consultant, you're regularly busy with your clients' projects. So I enjoy Power Apps and I enjoy teaching people how to use it because, I mean, business users need to stay relevant in their fields as well. So Power Apps isn't just for IT. It's for all the business units that you have available. I mean, whether it be HR or finance. So I'm really, really stoked with what Power Apps brings to the table. Power Apps, Power Automate, all the Power pieces that sits under the Power Platform. That's me.
And I think that, you know, from my perspective, being an architect and seeing the customers that I work with are generally very like super compliant, right? So there is a way that you need to deploy a resource inside of Azure that somebody who's not well versed in Azure won't necessarily know what to do or how to do it, right? So to make it frictionless to get into Azure, you could be like, okay, well, can I go into Teams? Can I request a resource? Let's say it's a storage account. Let's say it's a resource group. Let's say it needs specific tags applied that that person has no idea about. Let's say there's a cost center that has to be attached to that resource. Let's say there's a private link that has to be attached to that resource. Let's say there's disabling public IP address on that resource, or whatever that case may be, is that actually doesn't have to be the person requesting the resource's problem, right? It's all built into the logic of the Power Apps. So you're running PowerShell in the background that's going to create this resource in a compliant fashion, but the person doesn't even need access to the portal, as well as the fact that you've got this incredible approval workflow, right? So you can say, request it. The request then goes through to the manager then approves it, and then the resource gets deployed. So the person can have a storage account inside of Azure that they're going to use for dumping files. Let's say they're a data platform person, dump a bunch of Parquet files or whatever the case would be. They can then do that, they can get that resource, but they don't actually have to know how to do it in Azure, and we don't have to worry as architects about whether that particular resource has been deployed compliantly or not. So I mean, you know, this is obviously not necessarily one of those production-ready versions of it, right? But the idea is that you can expand on it. You can, I mean, the possibilities using PowerShell Azure CLI are endless. I mean, you can deploy fully compliant Kubernetes cluster.
Yes.
To get it at least once. A fully compliant Kubernetes cluster, you know, and it can be requested, you know, how many nodes you want, etc., all done as these variables that get passed through. And the cool thing is we even, for Alistair's benefit, decided to integrate SharePoint. So I think let Carike do the demo and we can go through it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Warren. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm just going to go over some of the things that you get with the Power Platform, just for those who don't know. And, you know, like I've mentioned before to Warren, is by now probably people should know about the Power Platform, but there are some people who aren't aware of what you get when you open the Power. Maybe they've never even opened the Power Apps page or the Power Automate page. So just going to show a little bit what you get, and then I'll jump over to what we created inside of Teams. And then just take you through the whole process of what we've developed. And then once I'm done with the business user side, I'll give over to Warren and he can explain the Azure piece of this. And what really inspired me also about this is, especially for someone who, like I said, like in my case, who's beginner Azure and don't really know how to develop things or create things on Azure side, this would be a lovely project for someone to, like a business user, to work together with their IT people who understands the Azure field, but they're coming from a business perspective. So just looking at the screen that I'm showing now is make.powerapps.com. This is the screen that you first met with when you want to create any sort of Power App. Power Apps are used for, there's different kind of apps that you get. So, sorry, Matt, yes, I see your hand.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to understand. So is there a Microsoft 365 license that the user needs just to have the Power Apps stuff, or is there you talk about business users, most of them would most likely have some kind of M365 license or Office 365 license. So I don't really want to get into a licensing conversation, but I'm sure that's a prerequisite, right? A license for
well, that's a
Power
great
platform.
question. So with Microsoft 365, you get access to Microsoft Power Apps, Power Automate, Power Virtual Agents, all of those things. What you would need to do is, as soon as you, so with Power Apps, when you start building and you start integrating data, so you connect to data, right, which we call connectors. It's once you start using premium connectors, that's when you would need to delve into separate licensing that's outside of your Microsoft 365 license. But by default, you get you can create Power Apps and you can integrate it with SharePoint, Excel, Word, so the whole Office suite. It's once you start connecting to on-premise data like your SQLs and those kind of things, or your line of business apps that's sitting on-prem, then you need a gateway, and that's when you need premium connectors. Does that answer your question?
Cool. Yeah, thanks. No, I'm just
awesome.
This screen, the user's licensed to get to this thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, so anyone with a Microsoft 365 can navigate to this and they can start creating apps. Just something to note as well, that would be Canvas apps. So when you want to build model-driven apps, you need to have some Dynamics 365 licenses as well. Not necessarily Dynamics 365, but you have to have Dataverse database capacity. So yeah. But licensing, there's actually a very cool document that describes or explains all the licensing. So that's something I could share if there was an interest for that. So yeah, this is the main place where you would create Power Apps, right? This is where people would generally start, but you can also create Power Apps from either SharePoint or, like we have done, you can create it inside of Teams. So I'm going to hop over to Teams. And then I'll show you where to start to get the Power Apps add-in. So what you need to do to start creating apps for Teams, and just to be clear as well, when you create an app inside of the team space, you have to assign it to a team, right? So you're creating an app per team. If it's an app that you want to make available to the organization, that's something you would create from the actual Power Apps space in your browser. But when you create it inside of Teams, you're creating it for a specific team. So to get this little block on the left, you would need to obviously go to App Center and you would just type in Power Apps. And you would see that connection is available. And then once you've selected that one and you add it, you'll be met with this screen. So your home screen, you can click on Learn More to learn about building these apps, but it also comes with a set of templates, which is really cool. Like Microsoft has invested a lot of time in developing templates for apps that you don't have to do a thing. You literally click the template and it just works and integrates with your Microsoft 365 tools that you have available. So we went ahead and we created a custom form. So I'm just going to click on Build, because this is where you would go to build a new app. And as you would notice is this is the left-hand side pane would show the teams that you've created apps for. So we went ahead and created a team called Team Azure Dev. And we created an app. So that would be just clicking on new, saying that you need a new app, chatbot, or card. So if I'm just going to open the app so you can see, just get a look and feel of how easy it is to add things or remove things on side of the app, and you just publish it and it's available on your team. Then I'll navigate to that. And what I've used for the app is I created a SharePoint list. So the benefit of that is if you've got an existing SharePoint list with the fields that you want to use, you can just put a form inside of your app and you say your data source is SharePoint, and it will pull in all the fields for you. So you don't have to go and create the labels with the text fields. It creates all of that for you. So you literally just supply your SharePoint list as the resource. So I'll go to the SharePoint list in a bit. So this is the canvas that you got. On the left-hand pane is just a little hierarchy of the fields that you have on the form. You can either navigate to them from here, or you can use the actual form. On the right-hand side, like you have within Visual Studio as well, you've got your properties based on the field, and you can update those properties. So if I click on the form element of this, you'll notice that the data source is Azure VM request. So if I click the drop down, you can see just by the icon that that is a SharePoint list that I've used. And from this data resource, if you look at the fields property, you can actually choose the fields you want on your form from that SharePoint list, which is pretty cool. So you can add and remove fields based on what you want for this form to have, or what the person needs to capture. And I mean, you can actually add quite a few things. You can add labels, text boxes, but you can also add charts and shapes, icons. You know, the 3D printing thing is pretty cool. There's some media that you can do, 3D objects. The 3D object one is always fun for me. You can actually show 3D objects inside of your Power App. So I've seen an example before where someone used that to what was it? Oh, it's to measure, like in a warehouse, where they can actually see where they want to place the next thing that they want to put in that warehouse, and it actually displays it, you know, like we've got with mixed reality. So that's a pretty cool thing that you can do within Power Apps. And I mean, since it's going to be published to a team, you could easily communicate on that. So there's a lot of possibility with Power Apps that you can do. So I'm just going to close this screen. I'm going to navigate to our team where I actually built the app. And then once you're in the team, it'll actually load the app and people can start completing this information. So just to show you that I'm not smoking my socks, this is the SharePoint list with some previously captured values. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to complete that form. It should save it to SharePoint, and then I'll navigate to the Power Automate part. So that Power Automate is the workflow bit that sits behind the Power Platform. So, and if I'm jumping too fast or navigating too fast, please stop me and ask questions if you have any.
Carike, so I have a question just around
Sure.
the list. So I assume that the IT folks who understand Azure and what's required from an Azure perspective would build out the list and the columns in the list, or the fields. And then that gets presented through the Power App through to the business users who don't need to know, they just need to fill in something. And maybe even it's pre-filled for them, or it's like a drop down that they can choose. It's not necessarily, well, you know, you need to type out the region and it must be in the right format. Or if you're creating a storage account, for example, we know that storage accounts have got very specific naming rules. As IT, you can help the user with that information by pre-filling it or something. Right?
Absolutely. So you'll see when we get to the location and the operating system or image type, we've actually done that. We looked at the list that's available or what's required from an Azure perspective, because it's looking for specific values. And we've just populated the lists or SharePoint. We created a choice field where we populated those values. So from a business user perspective using this thing, they just click on the drop down and they choose the one they want. And obviously what a person can do is sometimes maybe, okay, this is probably creating a resource for someone who has some technical background, right? So you would understand what a Windows 2016 data center is, you would understand some storage, right? But if it's someone who doesn't know, I mean, you could easily add descriptions, like it does in Azure, to say that when you choose this, this is what you get with it. This is what this means. The standard D2S, that's what it means. You could easily add those kind of descriptions. So I just want to create a resource group name. One of the lessons learned, I would say, from this app, and this was me and Warren yesterday, is the VM names doesn't like special characters. So that's something that can be like the underscore. It didn't want the underscore. So something like Warren suggested is, and that's definitely doable within Power Apps, you can add validation to your fields as well to make sure that people enter the data the way you want it to go into Azure. So with location, you'll see that it's a drop down. So you've got South Africa North, South Africa West, East Asia. I mean, those are things that a person can get off of the internet, or like Warren did, he ran a PowerShell just so you can see what values is the PowerShell looking for. And you copy and paste those. I mean, you can easily send those details from a text perspective. You can send it to your business users and update them on that. So they can just update the choice fields with what it is. I mean, you can easily also create a different SharePoint list and make this a lookup field so that you maintain it in one list. And if you've got multiple SharePoint lists, that's depending on this information. Cool. So I'm just going to choose the values quickly. So here, for instance, as well, you've got your Windows 2016 data center, Windows 2019, Ubuntu LTS. That's the way that the PowerShell would take those values. So you can just choose one. So we've chosen that one. For the VM size, we've got the standard D2S, the version 3, D4 version 2. And then I've just added an extra field called tags. So for instance, when you're creating it, are you creating it for a dev environment? Is it for IT, HR, finance? I mean, the list is endless for what you can tag it with here. So it just makes sense why you're wanting this resource as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and submit this request. And as Warren has mentioned, it actually goes through an approval process, because you also don't want people just randomly going and requesting for resources to be created, because we know people can go crazy like with that. Look what they did with Teams. Everybody just went and created Teams, right? So it goes through an approval process, and obviously that person who approves it needs to also be proper technical to understand that, is this required? Does it make sense for this person to have this created? Or maybe they can point them to another resource that already exists, So this is very high level. I mean, you can always add more fields. You can add something like, give me a reason why you want this thing. So it's got like proper background as to why this person is requesting this resource. So once you've submitted the request, that's fine. What will happen is, inside of Teams, I'm now being the approver as well, is approval workflow would come through from, and we're using team approvals actually. And it will pop up to say that, listen, there's something for you to approve. But while we're waiting for that, I just want to navigate to the actual Power Automate flow that we created. So this is the page for Power Automate. So it's make.powerautomate.com. Very simple. This is the workflow part inside of SharePoint. So, not SharePoint, Microsoft 365. So in the old SharePoint days, we had SharePoint Designer to build our flows, or we had Nintex workflows, or you would build flows using K2. Power Automate has become the new face of workflows. So, and I must say, it is a really powerful tool when it comes to automation, especially. Al?
Can I just comment for 2 seconds?
Yes, please.
For those that are interested in business process management and a few other things, the Power Platform Suite is there for that. Just know that there are limitations to Power Automate.
Absolutely.
K2 is still, well, it's owned by Nintex now, but it's still regarded as sort of inter-application workflow engine, and it's a very, very robust and powerful and mature engine. If you are comparing something like Power Automate, Nintex, or K2, or Webcon, or LiveLink BPM, understand that it is the youngest of the platforms out there. So it's not fair to compare something like Power Automate that's got limitations when it comes to state machine workflows and nested workflows and sub workflows. Don't compare it to an Nintex or to a K2, because it's going to fall short. And there's been an ongoing debate about Power Automate providing that level of enterprise readiness when it comes to going up against an Intex or a K2 or Webcon or Skybo or one of the other large BPM tools out there. Also on the Power Apps side, I understand that the forms are not responsive. So when you design a form, don't expect your user to literally open up his phone and go, hey guys, I can now render it on my phone. You actually design based on device. So you'd have a mobile view, you would have an iPad view, and you'd have a desktop view of the Power Automate or the Power App itself.
Can I come in there, Al?
Yes, please do.
So with that one, actually, I have got a demo of where it's on my mobile as well, and I didn't have to design it at all. It is completely responsive when you design it within Teams. Yeah.
Okay, so all right. If it's a Power App that's published to Teams, Teams does the
responsiveness for you. Yes.
Okay, great. So that's
just to add to that, because I actually checked it this morning just to speak on responsiveness as well, because I was going to touch on like whether you on the road and you need a resource quickly, because I know with GitHub code spaces you can develop as you go, and if you require resource, I mean, you're on your mobile maybe, so that is something that's useful to know.
So just the caveat, you have to publish it inside of Teams then for it to be responsive?
100%. I need to confirm, like I know they've worked on the responsiveness within Power Apps a lot, but as far as I know, at this point, it's by publishing it in Teams, because Teams has its own responsiveness or design that works, that goes with mobile.
It's bootstrapped for that. Perfect.
Yes. Any other questions? And thanks for that point, Al, as well.
Just that.
Cool. So I'm just going to hop onto the flow just to show you some of the steps that we have built. Once again, like to Alan's point, this is built for the business users, right? It's to make their lives easier and to automate processes that they struggle with on the daily, but something simple that they can build, because there are limitations, definitely. But it is very effective in what it does. So I'm just going to go through the steps that we have built quickly. So the view that you're seeing now is just more or less the details of a flow that you've built, whether it's running or not. You can see the success runs that you had or where it failed. You can see the connections that's involved with your flow. You can see the owners of the flow. This is one of those limitations, is when a flow is just sitting under your flows, you can't change the owner. But as soon as you add this flow to a solution, you can actually change the ownership of a flow. So that's something good to know. Just clicking to edit the flow quickly, because I just want to run through the steps that we have built, and just showing how easy it is to build this flow as well. So what we have is we've got a SharePoint connector inside of this flow to say trigger this flow when an item is created inside of SharePoint. So if I just go back to the SharePoint list, you'll notice the VM Cloud Friday I created is sitting there, and that is what triggered this flow to run. And the status is currently sitting at requested. So what we've built into the flow is, as it progresses through the steps as well, it updates this status. So you, at least when someone looks at their item, they know that it's being worked on, or it may be stuck in a status. Then what we've got is making use of the approvals inside of Teams. We've got an approval. So that just goes through, it's a simple approve or reject. You can give a title, you can say who this approval will be assigned to. It's integrated with Active Directory, so you get the users that's sitting in your Active Directory. You can give some details, you can give a link to the actual SharePoint item, and here where you see the SharePoint looking blocks is where it's actually using the information or data that it gets from this block over here when an item is created inside of SharePoint. So you can use what they call dynamic data. So as you build your flow and you put in steps, you can start using the data from that step below it. Okay. You can also customize this, whether it should say approve or reject. You can add your own values. You can add custom responses. It doesn't have to be approve or reject. It can be 3 things. It doesn't necessarily have to be 2. Just so that you know that. Then for the condition, We're just saying if the outcome is equal to approved, do some steps, and then if it's yes, it will do these. If it's no, then it will do that. So just updating the status from a SharePoint perspective, it's sending an email to say that your request has been approved, and then it starts running a Power Automate for desktop flow. So Power Automate for desktop is not to be confused with Power Automate in the cloud. It is two different things, and you get exposed to different kind of steps or actions that you can complete. Al, do you want to mention something?
Are you monitoring my facial expressions?
I am.
I do. Is this a team flow or a user flow?
This one is a user flow.
Okay, so just bear in mind, if you are going to create this and you leave the company and they disable your account, this shit doesn't work.
Yes.
So I understand the difference between team flows and user flows.
User flows. Yeah, something
yeah.
that I would also suggest as a best practice is to use a service account when building flows instead of using your account. Cool. Awesome, and thank you for that. Yeah, so so then we run a Power Automate desktop flow. So Power Automate desktop, I'm just going to open it quickly. Allows you to use a whole new tool set of actions that you get from what you get in Power Automate Cloud. So you'll notice that inside of this one, we've only got one step, which is run the PowerShell script. So that's the PowerShell script that Warren would need to create the Azure resources. So this can be the IT person or the business person that kind of like adds these steps to the flow. And this runs on the server. It can run unattended or attended. Attended, I think, doesn't require, it requires a Power Automate license, but you get a different one if you want to run it unattended. So you get Power Automate license with RPA. Then you can run your workflows from Power Automate desktop unattended. So this is also used for robotic process automation. You'll use the Power Automate desktop part of this. So what this will do is it will actually on the server open PowerShell, run the script, and do what needs to be done. Okay, so that's that. So what I'm going to do,
in case I missed it, sorry, Carike, where's the server? What server is that? Is that like
Warren?
That runs the PowerShell?
I don't know if Warren want to answer that.
Yeah, sure. So it's literally just a jump box running in Azure. Yeah, okay. It can be running anywhere. If you want it running all the time. So in this case, I've just got a machine sitting inside of Azure that I use for bouncing stuff. And it works with certificate authentication, which uses a service principal inside of Azure. So the service principal's got the contributor access to the subscription. And then by using certificate authentication, you can then open up that PowerShell Azure session without having to be prompted for a password. So the idea is that you can just say, connect, select subscription, deploy VM, get out of there. And so that the whole process can be automated from that box.
Okay, cool. So it's not like somebody's desktop or, you know,
well, the thing is,
it could
be somebody's desktop.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that
but you wouldn't want
in this case, it's
to
a
be
server.
Yeah.
Yeah, you wouldn't want it to be on someone's desktop necessarily, but Power Automate is also a Power Automate desktop is precisely for that, to run some desktop apps or get access to desktop apps, right? So if it was a business user wanted to populate some Excel spreadsheet, I mean, they can easily use Power Automate desktop for that as well.
But in this case, it's running PowerShell and the module.
It's running PowerShell, yeah. On a server, yeah.
Got it.
Okay, cool.
Thanks.
So just want to show quickly before I hand over to Warren that the approval came through inside of Teams. This is what the approval will look like, to say that a request for a VM to be created has been requested. It actually points the link to the actual SharePoint list item that was created so that the approver can look at those details. It's saying that it's pending a response, so it kind of has like a hierarchy of how this flow is progressing through the steps, and you can be like happy proceed, and you can approve it as the approver, and then the person who requested that approval, the person who logged that ticket, it will get that the thing has been approved. And then you'll also notice in SharePoint if I just refresh it, it will go from requested to approved. So it means it's gone through that step in the workflow. So the next step is to start the Power Automate for desktop flow, and that runs from a server perspective. So when you set up this step, you actually point the connection to that server that Warren was talking about, so that at least know where it's looking to start this Power Automate for desktop. It's not just sitting at random. You have to specify the connection to the actual one. And then it should start or kick off that creation or the PowerShell of the virtual machine. And that's me handing over to Warren.
Cool. And then, yeah, so like, for instance, if you've got any sort of conditional access policies, or somebody's not allowed to log in to the portal from somewhere, or run PowerShell remotely from somewhere, you can make sure that this box is sitting on a virtual network that's allowed to, right? So simply, it's just a guy sitting over here with Power Automate sitting on top of it, all right? And then that'll kick off that particular PowerShell. PowerShell is quite simple. Cool thing is, all we had to do was these %sign McGafters over here. And so what we did was, we've got a Connect AZ account. You'll have the application ID, which will be the service principal ID. You'll have a tenant ID, and you'll have the certificate thumbprint of the certificate that was uploaded to the service principal. And then you'll select the AZ subscription. Now, obviously, I've removed my details from here, but you'll just pop them in there. We then specify the least amount of variables that we would need to create a virtual machine. So in this case, it's the OS SKU, username, password, and the name, basically. So, and the resource group. So what we'll do is we'll create the resource group first using the resource group variable, and these obviously then get mapped to those fields that are inside of that SharePoint list, and you map that inside of the flow. Then we just do a VM params, and we create the virtual machine, and we check to see that the virtual machine is good. So what will happen is, we should then see if the demo gods are being happy with us today. There we go. So I just hit the refresh button, and then you can see RG Cloud Friday, and boom, we've already got the virtual machine created with its virtual network. Now, obviously, you know, we used very, very default set of variables here, so it was very entry level, but the possibilities are endless. You could specify the VNet, you could specify the resource groups differently, you could specify dev, you could specify OS, you could specify a whole bunch of other different options for these specific types of resources, all within that PowerShell script. So there we have our machine. It's created just like that. So if you need any sort of help with that, I mean, I think I did make it available online, or I'll put it inside of my GitHub. It'll just be a simple script like this. You could add to it, remove from it if you're happy with it. You can also then create, all you do is you create a self-signed cert on the machine that you're using. Then you just import that into Azure and give it the correct contributor access to whichever subscription it may be. And there you go. Well, quick and easy.
That's amazing. What's nice is that the Power Automate side of it is the whole business process that goes along with creating a resource in Azure, right?
Correct.
So,
yeah. And you see, it's not rocket science, right?
That's the thing.
It's not hard, and it's not one of those things that you have to go through this massive approval process to try and get everything going. For like SMEs and things like that, they just want to keep track of what's being deployed in Azure and where it's being deployed. It doesn't have to go through this massive, but you're like getting that added bonus of being compliant, you know?
Well, it gives you that paper trail, right? So
correct.
you've
paper trail, yeah, and then also the list in SharePoint allows you to, if you want to build a report in Power BI, to say how many requests you've had this month, you know, what was requested and who approved it, all those kind of things.
Yeah, and I suppose combining the power of Power Automate or Power Apps and creating powerful, forms, you could have a whole lot of things in the request. Combining that with PowerShell and what you can do with creating resources in Azure, the possibilities are endless, really. I mean,
Absolutely.
you might spin up a not just a VM vanilla from the marketplace, but you could create your own VM templates for developers, for business users, whatever, and spin up that VM. So yeah, I guess the possibilities are endless. What about using things like Terraform or other infrastructure as code instead of PowerShell kicking off infrastructure
definitely
as code?
100%. You could kick off that Terraform plan, Terraform apply, no problem. Anything that could be run via PowerShell can be done. So that's the cool thing. So we chose just a stock standard virtual machine, but I mean, you can deploy an ARM template with PowerShell. So you could deploy bicep templates with PowerShell. So the idea is that you could have a repository of ARM templates that have got, public IP addresses denied, or, NSGs saying that 3389's gone, or enable just-in-time access on the virtual machine, not have it deploy SSDs and only HDDs for dev workloads and those sorts of things. So you can build in all that logic, export the template, and then just actually fire off apply template, and that's it. And then
all you're doing
so you don't
is
actually have to
parameters.
know a lot of PowerShell either, right?
Yeah.
So the idea is you can actually just say, okay, well, I picked up this ARM template from the Quick Start repository in GitHub. I've dropped it on the server, and I execute this one-liner that will enable each environment to have their own, resources deployed by people. You don't actually have to be a rocket scientist. It's quick and easy.
And I would imagine that some organizations who have been doing, infrastructure in Azure already, they have those ARM templates, or they have those Terraform or Bicep templates. This can just be bolted on, basically.
Yes, exactly.
And
so that the guys in the infra team don't
process.
actually have to do the deploying anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And it's inexpensive because it comes with whatever you've bought already. You don't have to go and buy additional licenses for, like, let's say, Terraform Enterprise or whatever the case would be, is, some sort of, ServiceNow integration. I mean, the ServiceNow integration with Azure so you can deploy resources is like terribly expensive. And here you've got that whole trail, the approval workflow and everything all there.
Yeah, that's cool. And like Carike said, you could have dashboards in Power BI to, so that the business, the management level can see what's going on, see what's being requested, what's been deployed. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's pretty cool. I wonder. So the only thing that like is a thing for me is that PowerShell running on a server. So you have to have that infrastructure to be able to deploy infrastructure.
Correct. Look, I mean, when it comes to connecting something up easily, right? I mean, having the ability to run it. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I think you can run certain commands straight out of Power Automate Cloud. But we didn't dig into it. I mean, you try to keep it as sort of simple as possible to say, well, if I've got this machine is on the network, it has access to where it needs to go. Power Automate can then run what it needs to run on that machine, and just keep it simple, stupid.
Thanks, guys. See, Carike, you have to go. Thanks very much.
Yes.
Before you go, is there any way like people can kind of reach out to you if they want to chat about how they can do this in Power Automate?
So I'm on LinkedIn and I'm also on Twitter. My Twitter tag is Carike_B. I don't know what the LinkedIn one is. It's just Carike.
Just look. Okay, cool.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank
Carike.
you so much, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Warren.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Are you also up, Warren?
Yeah, I will drop if I'm no longer needed.
No, you can stay and chat.
I'll drop into the background.
The background, yeah. Well, okay, that's cool. Our next session is only really supposed to start at 10:30 because we're waiting for the other speakers. So we can take a little break and then come back.
I've got a couple of questions for Warren. If that's okay. Well, so we've seen a session talking to how to provision services, not just a VM, right? In this case, it was, hey, I want a VM. You provisioned a VM in that. And we've seen, and this is outside of the Azure portal. right? So you're not navigating to portal.azure.com, clicking on a button saying create resource and then doing things, right?
Yeah.
And it's to make provisioning of applications and or services and or virtual machines easier for people to provision this, right?
Correct.
You've also mentioned stuff around that there are provisioning engines like Terraform and Bicep and a few others that are all for the script kiddies of the world to do that. How would you, when you look at operational compliance, right? So let's say you are moving to the cloud, right? And you're using Azure Migrate and you dump 200 VMs in the cloud. And now you want to provide a service back to business and or the IT staff. What sort of guardrails would you recommend get put in place so that something like this becomes a viable alternative to IT people using Terraform, or there's some form of DevOps pipeline that you're going to use scripting to provision services or resources in Azure?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what that's the whole reason for us looking at this. Is not everybody knows how to build a CI/CD pipeline. There's a group of DevOps guys and they get tasks. So generally in an organization that's compliant, they'll go through some sort of vetting or approval process about what is allowed to be deployed and how it's supposed to be deployed. So if you are going to deploy a storage account, make sure that it is not publicly accessible. Make sure that the shared access keys or the shared access signatures are hidden and disabled and rotated. There's a bunch of those sorts of policies. Let's say lifecycle management, where we say, okay, if a storage account gets created, that after 30 days, the stuff moves to cool storage, and after a year, it moves to archive storage, or whatever the case would be. Those sorts of policies can all be applied by either the ARM template or the Bicep template or Terraform or whatever the case would be, but not everybody knows how to do that. But there's a team inside of the organization that has vetted this stuff and they've put it inside, let's say, a repo, and they've said, okay, well, if you want to deploy it, you have to deploy it this way. So the guy goes and he now wants a storage account because he's doing some sort of process automation, or he's trying to build a data lake or something, but he has no idea how to do this stuff. He has no idea how to deploy this stuff either. What we can do is we can build a Teams app that says, come to this section. Do you want a resource group? Yes, I'd like a resource group. Would you like a storage account? Yes, I'd like a storage account. Would you like ABC? What do you need so that you can start working on your project? And you just hit the request button. Then it goes to the repository, and this, quite simply, you can just deploy the PowerShell. It says, take the Bicep template that has been approved by the business and deploy it for me. So then you're taking the overhead away from the DevOps team, you're taking the overhead away from the InfoSec team, and you're taking the overhead away from the infrastructure team, because they don't actually have to care. Because they know whatever gets deployed by this thing, somebody knows about it. It's got a cost center that's been tagged to it, and it's being deployed in a secure fashion. And again, it's simple. It's not something that, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. The stuff that we built there was just allocating variables, matching it into a list, and applying an approval workflow to it. So, the hardest part there, from my perspective, was building the SharePoint list. So it wasn't the PowerShell. So I think to answer your question, it's one of those things that can get an organization moving quite quickly. Taking the overhead off the single admin guy that's sitting there deploying all of the resources or whatever. Let's say you take an SME or whatever the case would be. Those guys are inundated all the time. He just says, I've got this repo of stuff. You're allowed to deploy this, and you can deploy it that way through Teams. Done. And it's free. Well, technically. All things considered, the licensing involved here is actually what? What was extra here? Nothing. If you've got Office 365 and you've got an Azure subscription, you're good, right?
Yeah, because there's no premium connectors.
Yes.
But I guess to Alistair's question about guardrails, you have those up front, right? You have them in Azure policy.
Yeah.
Or, you have those governance things.
This guy's not going into the portal. He can't.
Yeah, so he's not subverting or going around any of those policies and procedures or
Correct.
guardrails.
Yeah.
But you need to have those up front, or like you said, you build those into the
Correct.
automation that builds whatever it is that's being built.
Yeah.
So
like I said, remember when I said I've
yeah.
chosen that default set of values list, like what is my minimum spec to deploy a VM? You as your company will decide that, right? And say, okay, well, the minimum spec needs to make sure that that VM doesn't have a public IP address.
Yeah.
So you make
Yeah,
sure that in that PowerShell or in that ARM template that no public IP address gets deployed. You've already got that compliance built in. It's there. It's going to happen. I mean, there's no, I mean, you don't even have to go into Azure policy and put down a policy that prevents somebody from deploying a public IP address, because it's just not going to happen in the first place. So, it does make that simpler. I mean, yes, we've got this whole cloud adoption framework and well-architected framework, and, we're looking at massive 150-page architecture that people have to go through. And it's not an easy thing, right? So in this case, all we do is we say, just don't deploy one in the first place. Unless you need one, then obviously things change. But as far as the automation goes, you can just stop it straight there.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yes and no. I think it's important to note that if you are doing operational compliance from a governance perspective, you would need to work with the teams that are doing that. So this is Azure policy, and Azure policy says that these are the services and the SKUs for the VMs that you can actually spin up.
Correct.
Right? And that then needs to be tied back to the list that you had earlier on,
Correct.
selecting the resources and all of that. And then if you're using a managed identity or a service account or a service principal, pick one to provision this. And then also that box that's running the PowerShell, that also comes at a cost. It's not just even if it's a tiny VM, it's still additional cost to the environment. So be wary of what is required to make sure that this all fully functions, right? Before you run to business and say, hey, we can use Teams to spin up VMs. Just understand what it takes.
Well, you could probably use the same machine that has the DevOps agent on it, right?
Yeah, just be wary that that the planning side of things is the easy part for me is creating the SharePoint list.
Yeah, but I think that's the part that is the planning, right? So because you can't do anything without that SharePoint list that has all of the values that you need. And so that, somebody who's a low code, no code, what do they call them? Business developer.
Citizen developer.
Citizen developer, yeah. They can be excited about it, but they need all of that in the SharePoint list or whatever it is first to be able to build the app. And that's the conversation that needs to happen with the IT and the compliance guys to make sure that whatever the organization is deploying meets those rules that the organization has. Right. So that's where IT would be involved. But once that's done, it's kind of you're laying the foundations, the groundwork for that to just organically happen. And over time things would probably have to change, but it's a case of going back to a SharePoint list and just changing a value or changing a column, adding another column or whatever it is.
If you use the Graph API, you should be able to do a lookup. And
yeah,
that would be exciting to actually pull the SKU through in real time, all the services that, well, I don't know if you can push the services that are available through Azure policy to a dynamic list for lookup, right? So let's say you want a VM that's not in the list of approved VMs, right? That's always the tricky part.
Yeah, but I mean, there's obviously going to there'll be some edge cases that don't, the resource that the person requires is not in the form, it's not in the app, right?
Mm.
So then they have to go and speak to IT. But then
Actually have a conversation with IT.
yeah, and then that's when IT get involved and say, well, you want to deploy those, what are those M machines, the really
The
expensive
series.
machines.
Anything
Yeah,
that runs
and
SAP, right?
yeah. We have to get like proper, we have to get a quota on our subscription before you can go and deploy that. It's not going to be available to just go and deploy it, right? So stop the bus. Let's have that conversation with business and Microsoft and make sure that we can deploy that, cost aside, and then so
Which
yeah,
you
I mean,
which you can in South Africa North and South Africa West. We have lots of M series, so please do use them.
Just make sure you check your
no
quotas
marketing.
first. Before you
Shameless
decide to-
punt. Yes, we've got lots of capacity. Please use it.
Is that as of August 2023?
It's
Because
as of no date specifically.
no
but
date.
Right.
We
Okay.
have lots of
Could you tell us what resources you're going to run out of capacity in soon, rather?
in South Africa. In South Africa, none of them. We're
Right.
good.
As of
Okay, good.
August 2022, the 12th of August, we cannot guarantee that the statement will be true on the 13th, right? So,
Yeah. But if
so
you
go-
order now,
No, look, all things considered, yeah, we're good in South Africa. Everything is hunky dory.
everything's back to normal now because it's a new financial year. So they can switch things on again.
Well, the thing is, it's more around the chip shortages and things. I think the whole planet doesn't know how to deal with it. So, yeah.
Apparently,
Yeah,
the only vendor in South Africa that actually has tin is First Distribution, and they've got Hitachi tin. That's what I've been told in country. Everything else is at least 8 weeks delivery time. So another good reason why you should move to the cloud, because there is tin. And there's tin in multiple regions as well. Yes,
and
very excited
I
about
learned
it.
that we can soon start deploying into South Africa West. Is that right,
There
Warren?
is that rumor.
Sorry, what
that is
rumor was
going
that?
around.
Soon
SA
we'll be able
West
to start deploying into ZA West.
So you can,
Can.
but it's obviously still just under requests. So
Okay.
yeah, just make sure that you're whitelisted for it so that you can use it. Remembering that it's still technically considered a DR region for our services, right? So when you're making your architectural decisions, and let's say you're wanting to use like Synapse and certain platform as a service applications, that your primary is always going to be in the South African North, because it's AZ aware and all that lovely stuff. So I think just bear that in mind, that there are certain services we consider West as a DR. So if, let's say, that 22 milliseconds between North and West is going to impact your workload, then consider that. But other than that, no. I mean, if you're planning on doing some sort of a lift and shift of a bunch of servers and things, and you want your primary to be in West, I don't see why not.
But yeah, like you said, you have to request.
Yes, just request
ability to deploy. Yeah, and there's a form for that. There's a Power Apps form.
Well, look, the dream is to have two fully functional, fully feature paritied regions in South Africa, ZA West and ZA North, right? And that's just it's just going to take time, and it's supply demand, right? My recommendation to customers in Cape Town, if you are hell-bent on having services in Cape Town, then put your hand up and say, hey, I'd like to do this, and actually commit to that. This is not field of dreams. If they build it, if we build it, they will come, right? There is that, but you actually have to start using it. Otherwise, it's don't say I want stuff in Cape Town and then you don't consume it, because we've had a lot of that from customers going to Microsoft saying, hey, give me stuff. I want it in Cape Town. You know what Cape Townians are like. And I mean, I live here. We want it here. It must be here. We want it here. And then we go, well, here it is. And they're going, well, not now, tomorrow, or now. So that doesn't work, people. But I'm very excited for Microsoft FY23 plans and their strategies and where they want to take the world of cloud computing or public cloud computing in South Africa. And for those that haven't seen what's been happening in the cloud world, just go have a look at how many other vendors are spending millions on deploying private cloud data centers in South Africa because they believe it's a thing. They're stupid because public cloud is the way to go, but that's okay. We'll allow people to believe that private cloud is better than public cloud. It's okay. Everyone has their opinions, and sometimes they're wrong. And in this case, they will be. Well, Splar licensing, and you can't spin up at scale. So what's the point, right? To private cloud. I mean, Matt, do you see a point to private cloud?
There's obviously use cases or business cases where there's data sovereignty and
means nothing.
Yeah, but so this is the thing. Businesses have their like, oh, we have to be compliant to whatever regulation, and therefore we can't use public cloud. And then when we actually dive into it and have a look at what those regulations say, it doesn't actually say that you can't have certain things in public cloud or whatever. It's I need Rufaro on this meeting to help back me up here because he's the compliance guy. But there's actually stuff that we can challenge those regulations, and public cloud is actually going to be going to help you be more compliant.
As of today, when we look at legislation in South Africa, and there's a new whole. It only applies to government. It doesn't apply to any other sector in South Africa, and it's not even legislation. It's a draft bill, April 2021, the Data and Cloud Bill. It's not an act yet. It hasn't been gazetted. That says that all government-owned data needs to be stored on infrastructure owned by government. And they're not going to pass that because if you look at the Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty and data sovereignty and data residency, same, right? Or data residency in country, you need to own data. You need to have exclusive access to the data that you own. Now, when you look at customer lockbox and all the other bits and pieces that come with that, I don't know what AWS does or Google Cloud Platform does, but I know what Microsoft does when it comes to that. There is no rhyme or reason for customers to use data sovereignty because they can't use data residency. It's in country, right? In South Africa, to say we're not going to cloud because it's not as secure as bricks and mortar and a perimeter network, I can pull the network cable out. Right. In fact, it's more secure to actually run it with all the tools, Defender, Entra, and Purview. You know, just go have a look at that. If you can replicate that service from in your own data center, by all means, I will eat humble pie. But I haven't seen, and yes, you can come with Proofpoint and all the other Content Locker and AirWatch and every other type of tool that's been out there before Microsoft decided to own the world with their security and compliance solutions and identity management solutions. By all means, bring it. I'd love to see that. But I do believe that public cloud is a thing. It's cheaper, more cost-effective, more scalable, more reliable, more available. Than our private cloud counterparts, especially in South Africa.